Parliament, and she can now talk to us about our tax dodgers, the real Scroungers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't actually think this audience really needs to be told the answer to that question. I suspect most people, if they've got as far as this room today, have probably given quite a lot of thought to this issue already. As John says, I've known John quite a long time. I met him when I first got involved with Unison, and I've got to say, I think it's absolutely tragic what's happening to public sector workers at the moment. We know there's been a pay freeze for quite a number of years now, but at the same time, what we also know is that those at the top of society, supposedly, the FTSE 100 directors, they managed to get a 12% increase in their wages last year. And whether it's in Britain or whether it's in any of the other countries where the debate is about austerity at the moment, what we're seeing is not just the living standards of ordinary people going down, but we're also seeing a huge transfer of wealth and power to those that have most already in society. And that's the case in Greece, in Ireland, in any of the countries that you look at, where ordinary people are being told that they've got to pay the price for the economic crisis. And the reality is that I think most people would have found it unbelievable in 2008 when they saw the shares, the values of shares plummeting on the stock market, when we moved towards a situation where we had the state bailing out the private banks. I think very few people would have believed that the response to that crisis would be to see the living standards of ordinary people eroded while the rich get richer and richer. And therefore I think this whole issue, both about welfare, but also about tax evasion and tax avoidance, is absolutely central to what's going on at the moment. On my way here, I've started using Twitter. I've put it off for many, many years because I just thought it was going to be yet another source of work for me. But what is, as you'll know, is really good about it is you do get the news very quickly. And today, this evening, the BBC Politics are telling us that the Prime Minister is hailing a tax deal of a European-wide agreement as European leaders agree to work together to ensure more transparency on the money that the multinationals have. And of course that was one of the questions that we had earlier in terms of has Europe got a role. And the reality is at the moment, tax evasion and tax avoidance are quite big political issues. The leader of the Labour Party has made a speech about it to Google today. Margaret Hodge is launching a charter at the Progress meeting next Monday. Some of you in the Labour Party will probably know what Progress is. It's a new Labour campaign within the Labour Party that organises for Blairite politics within the Labour Party. So really across the political spectrum, not just in Britain but throughout Europe, tax is a massive issue. But despite that, when we look at the facts, and I missed, I'm afraid, the beginning of Mark Sawatka's speech, but the reality is the resources are simply not going in to actually address these issues. When Labour was in government between 2005 and 2010, the numbers of revenue staff went down from over 97,000 to under 67,000. I don't know if Mark's been through the figures already. And with this government, we're losing another 10,000 staff. Now, frankly, how can the government possibly say it's serious about dealing with tax evasion and tax avoidance and the 120 billion or whatever the figure it is that isn't collected currently, when they are literally sacking the people whose job it is to do the work to get that money? So yes, it may well be that the money is hidden. I don't think any of us are suggesting that dealing with Google or Amazon or any of these people is easy, but the reality is if you don't have anyone that's actually doing that job and pursuing them, then how can we expect to collect that money? So this is an issue of political priorities and political choices. Politics is about choices. As a backbench Labour MP, I don't have a huge amount of power. I think that's one of the things that people have this expectation when they elect you as a member of parliament that you're going to have, that somehow or other you've got some kind of power or some kind of control. And the only power really you have as a member of parliament is the vote that you have on legislation, because so much power is centralised in the hands of the executive, in the hands of the government. And of course governments are absolutely terrified of the vested interests, whether that's the big six, whether it's in power, who, as we've learned recently, is paying no tax, but of course making absolutely massive profits, whether it's the Amazons, the Googles, the Starbucks, or many, many other companies that perhaps are not household names. Politicians simply do not seem to have the gumption or the political will to take these people on. So I think we're right to focus on this issue at the moment, because the reason that the party leaders, the reason that the European Union is focusing on this issue is because of the huge groundswell of anger from ordinary people when they see household names that they pay money to simply not paying tax, or paying tax at absolutely tiny levels. And that of course is at a time when for most people they're actually paying more tax. The poorest 10% are paying a higher percentage of their incomes than any other group. And whilst the top rate of tax for income tax has fallen to 45% from 60% 30 years ago, we're paying more in VAT and other indirect taxes. So what we're seeing is most people actually are paying quite a considerable amount of their income in tax, but using all the devices that Richard Murphy is already talking about, the tax havens, and all the other mechanisms, the multinationals, those that have wealth, simply are being allowed to get away with it. There's, I think as Mark has said, there's so many myths about this issue, but I think what this really is about is how we actually bust those myths, and how we find a way of getting the language that ordinary people understand, and find a way of convincing ordinary people that it's actually possible to do something about this. Because I think one of the big challenges that we have as a movement is not actually explaining to people what's going on, because I think a lot of people fully understand the way that capitalism works. People fully understand that those at the top, the richest in society, those that have wealth, whether that be multinationals or whether that be individuals, disproportionately get away with murder. People know that. But I think what perhaps has been very clear since 2008 is that people have so little confidence and so little faith in the ability to make political change that they actually don't accept that it's possible to do anything about that. And that's something that I'm very aware of as a constituency member of parliament, and I've said it before in meetings like this. One of the very common things I find as a constituency MP when constituents come to me about an issue, whether it's about the fact that a bus service is being stopped, whether it's about the fact that a breakfast club is being scrapped, or whatever the issue it is that they're coming to see me about, so often people say to me, I know there's got to be cuts, but, and then they go on to explain why the particular service that they're concerned about, that they've come to see me about, is the wrong place for the cuts to happen. What we need to do is to explain very, very clearly to people that austerity isn't working, that the economic policies that are being pursued by this government, and indeed many of the other countries in the West, particularly in Europe, that are facing the particular problems that we're facing at the moment, that the economic policies of cutting public spending, of taking money away from the poorest, from the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable and poor communities is actually the worst thing that we can be doing economically, and that there is an alternative and there is another way. And in my opinion, that's the huge challenge that the Labour Representation Committee has. It's going to be less than 2 years to the next general election. And I think, as has been said already, there is not a clear message coming from Labour that there is an alternative, that actually the economic policies of this government are not working, and that austerity is not the way to address the challenges that we face. We are living through the worst slump we've had 19th century. We are seeing the living standards of ordinary people going down. We know that incomes have gone up by 1.2% if you take into account private sector workers also, but the cost of living is going up by considerably more than that every year. So the reality is that for most people what they are experiencing is their own standard of living going down year on year. Now, if you believe Clinton, it's the economy stupid, you would think that therefore it would be obvious that the Conservative coalition wouldn't be able to win the next general election. But if you look at the opinion polls, if you look how well UKIP's doing, maybe not, I don't know, so much in this area, and maybe not so much in Scotland, but in large parts of the country, UKIP is able to identify with a lot of the concerns that ordinary people have and provide a simplistic solution that seems to mean something to them. And I think in a similar way, we've got to find a way to connect with those people. And that is about exploding the myths, about talking about how disabled people are being affected by what's happening, about explaining why it is that it's simply unacceptable that over the last 5 years food costs have increased by 30%, and perhaps talking about some of the reasons why that is. We know that 1/5 of all British workers are now paid less than the living wage. And I believe that if Labour were to go into the next general election arguing for a living wage, a wage that people could actually afford to live on, I believe that would be an incredibly popular policy. I think the policy of a minimum wage that Labour introduced in 1997 was shown to have worked. I stood in 1997 as a Labour candidate in Galloway and Upper Nithsdale, which was a very rural part of Scotland, when at that time there was many farm workers earning between 50p a pound an hour, and people were saying to me that we simply could not afford a minimum wage, that the effect that it would have would be that people would be thrown out of work. Now, the reality was that's a myth. That's not what happened. I think the experience of history has shown us very clearly that if you pay people a decent amount of money, what they do is they go out and they spend it in the local community. It also means that, frankly, if we're worried about our welfare spending, many of those people simply will not be claiming from the welfare state if they earn a decent amount from their employer. And I think Labour needs to put together those arguments. We need to say very clearly that actually most of the welfare bill, the majority of the welfare bill, actually gets paid out in pensions, and that the inaccuracies and the lack of truth that is punched day in and day out by some of the popular press, and frankly, which many people believe because they don't hear anything else, that many of those things are simply not true, and simply do not explain what's actually going on in this country. It's absolutely clear that the tax dodgers are the real scroungers in this country. I think that if we popularise that message, if we get the facts together, if we take advantage of what's going on now in the media in terms of what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Parliament, but actually what's happening in terms of people's own experience, I think this is a real campaign that can make a real difference and help the Labour movement in what we need to give people the confidence to actually say there is an alternative, we can do things differently. And if enough of us get together and campaign for that and put forward the arguments, then when it comes to the next general election, and maybe before, we will not just have a few politicians saying these things, but we'll have the mainstream politicians knowing they have to deliver on those policies, irrespective of what party they come from. And I believe if we get that message across, we can have some real successes. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm happy to answer questions on any issues at all. Obviously, the constituency I represent is quite different from the one you have here. But the reality is, in whatever part of the United Kingdom you're in, the issues are the same. It's a few people that hold all of the power. It's a few people that are manipulating the situation that we're in at the moment to take more power for themselves. And I think in every part of the country, actually, most ordinary people really understand that, but they simply don't believe that they've got the ability to change it. what our movement is about giving people the confidence to come together, to change things. We've had successes before over many, many years, and I believe that if we get together in larger numbers and put those cases across, my view is that we'll have some very big victories ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Katy for that, and